Much of what we see in the world around us required a certain level of engineering to design and build. In many instances, our engineering ability has produced some pretty spectacular things, including dams, bridges, and stadiums. However, with success comes failure, and there are more than a few terrible engineering flops to cover. From skyscrapers that fall apart to bridges that can't handle wind to ships that aren't waterproof, all of these fails are pretty big and make the wonky train tracks look like a pretty easy fix. Before we damage your belief in society's ability to build safe things, make sure you click that subscribe button. Tacoma Washington Bridge. Odds are you've likely seen some of the incredible footage of Washington State's Tacoma Bridge before it plunged into the water in 1940. The bridge had been built to span the Tacoma Narrows and was actually the third largest suspension bridge once opened. Yet it had a big design flaw. With only 2 lanes, designers used relatively small girders, which didn't provide enough rigidity to the finished product. The result was that in high wind, the bridge started swaying and twisting. In November 1940, the winds became too much and the poorly designed span collapsed. The Boston Molasses Disaster. In 1919, molasses was an important part of the food and drink industry. In the dockyards of Boston, a giant holding tank was built to hold over 2 million gallons of the sticky liquid. Unfortunately, the tank was never tested, and the design was prone to leaks. On January 15th, under the strains of its contents, the storage tank burst, releasing a tidal wave of molasses into Boston. Traveling at 55 kilometers an hour, the 26 million pounds of molasses crushed everything in its path, bent steel girders, and lifted homes off of their foundations. By the end, the tank failure had left 21 dead and 150 injured. Ryugyong Hotel. In the North Korean capital of Pyongyang sits a massive and imposing pyramid structure. It's known as the Ryugyong Hotel, but it's never actually had any guests. That's because the secretive country has never been able to finish this giant project for a variety of reasons. Perhaps most importantly, the Ryugyong is said to have various features, like elevator shafts, which weren't engineered properly and therefore don't really work. It's such a terrible design from top to bottom that some people are left wondering if it will ever actually be opened. Citi Field. The United States has a long love affair with baseball. It's part of the country's history and an important part of its identity. Because of this, you'd think they would have mastered the art of building a decent stadium. Not quite. Take Citi Field, for example. Costing $850 million, it was supposed to be the great new home of the New York Mets. However, flooding, faulty plumbing, and electrical, falling signs, crumbling concrete, and breakdowns in the elevators and HVAC system made this place a real lemon. Lotus Riverside Complex. In recent years, China has launched numerous ambitious building programs. However, lax regulations and less than stellar build quality have meant some projects live up to the Made in China label. Take the Lotus Riverside Complex, for example. In 2009, a newly built apartment building in the complex just fell over. It didn't collapse, but literally fell over on its side. The toppling was blamed on water, which weakened the ground underneath, a site which had many other owners in the complex asking for refunds. The Walt Disney Concert Hall. Architect Frank Gehry is known for making some impressive designs. Downtown LA's Walt Disney Concert Hall is one of them. The curving and twisting metal building is something to behold, unless you actually lived right near it. You see, the design of the hall meant it reflected a lot of sunlight, and we mean a lot. Pedestrians and drivers said the building blinded them, and nearby homeowners said the structure reflected a lot of sunlight, which heated up their apartments. Not wanting to be known for building death rays, authorities moved to sandblast the structure and reduce the troubling glare. The Hyatt Regency Walkway. The designers of the Hyatt Regency Kansas City Hotel looked to make their hotel stand out. How? They added suspended walkways in the atrium, which appeared as though you were floating in the air. Unfortunately, a design flaw meant that the rods and beams meant to hold up 2 of the walkways were insufficient. Barely able to hold its own weight, the added weight of spectators during a dance in July 1981 was the tipping point. The collapse killed 114 and serves as a stark reminder of what can happen when engineers cut corners. Chernobyl Nuclear Plant. In 1986, the nuclear plant at Chernobyl in the Soviet Union suffered a meltdown and explosion. To this day, large areas around the plant are off limits and devoid of life. In addition to human error, the reactor itself was to blame. Investigators found the reactor design worsened the situation thanks to the fact that it was prone to instability. More precisely, the control rods responsible for moderating the reaction in the reactor were poorly designed and actually caused an initial spike in power when inserted, something which should not happen. The John Hancock Tower. When a key feature of your 60-story building is the massive amount of glass, you better hope you have the right window designs. The people who designed and built the John Hancock Tower in Boston didn't do this. The result? While the building was under construction, it had a nasty habit of popping off glass panels which smashed on the street below. Not the usual household windows, these were 500-pound slabs. In fact, for 4 years, this happened until they discovered the window design was faulty. In the end, over 10,000 panes of glass had to be replaced, and the project went wildly over budget. The Titanic. We all know what happened to the famous Titanic, but it didn't have to. No, we're not talking about the iceberg. Titanic should have survived that strike easily. Unfortunately, poor design and materials used led to the demise of the massive ship. You see, researchers have concluded that the steel used in the iron rivets were too brittle to handle the strain of impact. In addition, the compartments where the water rushed in should have been watertight, but they were designed intentionally to have a gap at the top. This allowed water to eventually flow into other compartments, dooming the ship and Jack. Yikes, that is a lot of serious problems. Well, what do you think, folks? Have you encountered any of these engineering failures in your day-to-day life? Let us know in the comments down below. And while you're here, check out these other videos, subscribe to The Richest, because we're going to bring you more wacky content every day. Thanks!